Hi, and welcome back to the next edition of the Check-In podcast, where we're talking about leading well-being at work and at school and what that looks like. We're bringing in community builders and leaders from all different organizations and sectors. My guest this morning is Ms. Allyson Collymore. Allyson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Oh, me too. Maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Allyson Collymore. I am currently the director for the Center for Health Wellbeing, Center for Employee Health and Safety and Wellness with the Ontario Public Service. I like to think of myself as an organizational well-being strategist, meaning that in supporting the organization, whether it's dealing with issues of workplace well-being or inclusion and equity, I'd like to take a whole person approach, a whole organizational approach, looking at the systemic issues and then driving change through multiple different levels at the individual, at a leadership level, and a culture level. And so right now I have an amazing team that supports me in driving that change, from working on disability accommodation, mental health and well-being, health and safety. It's a big team, so I always forget. Workplace injury management. And then I have a team that deals with program development and business solutions.
Awesome. First question is what does well-being at work mean to you personally?
So, it's interesting that question, because being a focus of work, my first thing is, what do I do for the organization? But I really had to do that rethink for me as an individual. It's always really been, I'm very mission driven. And so the work that I do has to feed me internally. It has to align with my why. And for many years, that was a key driver, right? I needed to have a respectful workplace, managers that saw me, that supported me. And then I realized, probably around the pandemic, that I actually needed more. Because of, the work that I do, I'm so passionate about it, I go all in and I can push and push and push. And then the pandemic happened. And just before that, my mother had died after a long illness. There was, the pandemic, just dealing with the fear and the anxiety that was everybody around me. Supporting the organization that I did, there were some leadership changes, and I took on an even bigger leadership role in supporting the team, the broad team. And then George Floyd happened, and I was leading a team that was focusing on anti-racism, and a largely racialized team. And so I had all of that, and I just absorbed it. And I was just like, I can push through it, push through. And there was a time where my team was juggling two major portfolios, and just before I was about to do a presentation, I got a rush question from my manager, or from my ADM, but it was essentially a manager. And I found myself on the floor crying. It was the anxiety, and I was like, what's happened to me? I don't get anxious. Allison's always calm. Allyson always has this. And it wasn't, I was not happening. I was just, even the sound of a message would get me like this. And then I realized that I needed to reshift my concept of well-being to be much more holistic for me, in terms of recognizing my rhythm. What do I need to thrive, in terms of not just the work, but the spaciousness, how to create spaciousness so that I, who am a highly sensitive introvert, can create the decompression that I need to do the work that I need to do, to be whole. And so that's really what that means. It's about, yes, it's that holistic, career well-being, emotional well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, and creating space so that all aspects, not necessarily balance, because balance, people think it's 50-50, but it's in the right alignment with where you are at that particular point in time.
Yeah, I love that. Can you share one thing that your workplace does, big or small, that supports mental well-being or whole person well-being?
So I would say it's that systemic approach, looking at developing program and resources from a uh, individual well-being perspective. How do we develop their strength and resiliency and access to services so that they feel supported in a way that aligns with their individuality, right? So rather than a cookie cutter approach, we have a number of different programs that support that. Then it's looking at leadership, building their capacity to create a psychologically health and safety environment, and then looking at the culture, and how do we create a culture that supports all, that whole layered approach. So it's that systemic focus, um, and well, you just say one, so I'll probably leave it at that. Because one of the other things that I would say is it's the communication. It's that shared responsibility, and so which is all part of that whole systemic piece. And so communicating, right? So we have deputy ministers speaking and sharing their stories. We have executives sharing their stories from a mental health and well-being perspective, whether it's their own or people that they love, and that has that ripple effect because it normalizes mental well-being, mental health and well-being, and it helps others kind of develop their own awareness and openness to taking steps to support their well-being.
Hmm. And also, what's one challenge you're faced with as a leader in trying to support your team's mental well-being?
I would say having a sense of agency or empowerment. So my team is split up between programs and operations, and the operations team, or one of them is experiencing a particular increase or surge in service volumes. And what I've found with frontline people is, and this is anyone in the human services sector, you want to give, you're just very giving, and so sometimes with people who are highly empathetic, the whole notion of boundaries kind of blurs. And that happens on an individual, personal level, but it can happen on a professional level. And so with these surge in volumes, they're obviously feeling very overwhelmed. And, structurally, myself and the leadership team are doing what we can to help manage the volume, manage the workload. But it's also really hard to help the employees shift their thinking about, well, just because someone's called doesn't mean you need to always be there. You can set boundaries and still be professional. Self-care is part of customer service. And so that's what continually working on folks to realize that you can take care. I mean, it's that whole oxygen thing,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just personally, it's professionally. So that's what we're really trying to work with our team to say, take care of you so that you can truly take care of others.
Beautifully said. So let's speak of you. How does Allyson recharge Allyson?
So this is a constant work in progress. So, I told you about my incident before. I'm actually have a long-standing yoga practice, and I've actually trained as a yoga teacher. But I've had to learn to do that whole radical self-acceptance. One, admitting that I'm not an extrovert, I am a highly sensitive introvert, a social introvert, so I need that balance. But it's also recognizing that the practice that I had 20 years ago as a younger woman is very different than what it is now. And I used to have a lot of judgment about that. So I may not do a full on, 45-minute hour asana practice, but I do build in breathing throughout my day. I do take moments of just sitting and getting still. I take, throughout my workday where I have control, and it's not always possible, I create the spaciousness between meetings, to have either deep thinking time, which is something I need, or even just to reset from one meeting to the next, or if I've had an intense conversation with somebody, to let go, to release the emotions from that, because I can carry it and thinking it's mine, and it's not necessarily mine. So really trying to remind myself of those practices. I do a lot of somatic movement snacks. So whether it's in the office or at home, I may not do a full, 45-minute workout, but I will move for like, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, minute, just to kind of let my body release. And in the summer, I go for walks in nature. In the winter, I am trying to do more walking, but I am not a winter woman. Um, so I need a lot of convincing that way. But I try, and so it's a very eclectic way, but it's very intuitive. What I found is I don't thrive on discipline when it comes to well-being. I thrive from devotion. So when I focus on what brings me joy and what intuitively feels right, for my body and my just overall sense, that's what I do.
Oh boy, yeah. I've learned so much along the way, and specifically with carrying emotion, and going from one meeting to the next. There's a lot of leaders that do that, and if there's no release, then that stays with you. And
Hmm.
we just don't know the effects that holding in emotions has on our bodies and so forth. You know,
Oh, it's incredible. There was times where my whole body was bracing, right? Because of the tension at the work, having conflict conversations, and then you end up the day and you're just like tense. And I'm like, well, why am I tense? Because my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm not tense. I'm like, no, no, no. My body remembers. You need
yeah.
to let it go. You need to release it.
And just on that, it was I was someone had recommended, and I watched. I always like those animal shows. The
Mm,
uh, National Geographic kind of things, and when, let's say, a gazelle is being chased by a lion or whatever it is, and it manages to escape. The animals, they'll do this
the
incredible
shake?
shake.
Yes,
And that's exactly what they're doing, is they're throwing out all the adrenaline per se
exactly.
into their system, and then they can graze again or whatever it is they're going to
Yes, they can
do.
come back to center 100%. So that's what I try and do too. And I try and encourage people and to do that. And they kind of look at me funny, like, what do you mean shake? I'm like, okay, you don't have to be so dramatic, but
Yeah,
even just shaking your hands is a way of helping to release it. Swaying can help, just to kind of let it flow, because otherwise it sticks, right? And then
yeah,
your shoulders go up and your stomach tightens, your throat closes, and you can't figure out why.
yeah, man. um so what advice would you give other leaders who are looking to increase or build upon their support for their teams?
Um, I would say, you know, right now, with the world being, there's such a focus on accelerated change, a lot of disruption, a lot of sense of uncertainty. Leaders across the board, whether it's frontline leaders to even executive leaders, they're struggling with that, right? We went from a time where there was much more steadiness and certainty, and how you lead in that environment versus how you lead in this current environment is different. And ultimately, in order to provide sustainable leadership in this day and age, it needs to come from within. And
Mm,
so you really need to take that more embodied approach, uh, from within, and then it comes out through psychologically safe leadership. We're not in a world where command and control will work, right? The dynamics have changed, the demographic has changed. And so, as part of well being, whether it's to do with workload, mental health, illness, burnout, all of that, at the ground of at the kind of foundation of it is embodied leadership to support psychological health and safety leadership.
mm, beautiful. And if and when the day comes that you choose to retire, how would you like to be remembered as a leader or coworker?
Um, Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think ultimately someone who models what they speak, someone who truly does embody the whole notion of embodied leadership, of being authentic in aligning my values and the way that I work. And so that would be the message that, or the feeling that I would like people to have as I pass on to my next step in life.
Amazing. Thank you for keeping the streak going. No one has answered that question with any kind of statistic as far as reaching plan or hitting targets or anything like that. It's all come from a inside out kind of perspective. So thank you. The last question is what gives you hope about the future of total well-being in workplaces?
You know what? It's conversations like these. More and more people are bringing that awareness of the importance of mental health and well-being, and that increasingly at all levels, from bottom up to top down, I think people are recognizing it as not a side thing, but as a strategic imperative. And, are we there yet? In the ideal state? No. But I think there's momentum, and that gives me hope, and that makes me quite excited.
Thank you. I know, like I speak on it regularly, and that is, I think we as a society in general, we're so busy, we're so putting out little fire, whatever that is, that we're always in the reaction kind of stage.
Yes.
And it's a lot of money and it's a lot of resources. Where if you put that in the preventative, how much productivity would go up and costs go down.
Exactly. But it's shifting your thinking, right? So it's not about let's just be productive. It's if you actually focus on the people, then they will be productive. I've found that in working with my teams. I'm very much someone who's focusing on the individual. So I will get to know, Nelson, what are your strengths, your things, what are your interests, and align the work that you do for that. And I'm always get incredible performance from my team, right? Not because I'm saying you must do it, right? Yes, there's an expectation for delivery, but people want to. They're excited. And then you cut people slack, right? At the end of the day, if they need to leave one day a little bit early, if they're just not feeling it, that's okay, because in the end, they will perform, right? So it's flipping, rather than focusing on delivery first, if you focus on people first, you get both.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for performing very authentically in this interview. I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us in the conversation, and wish you and your family all the best.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.